Wolverine's teammates are on a mission to find him and fulfill a promise they made years ago. What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is an I Review, a show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my impressions, and let you know whether it's something you should go back to the comic book shop for or not. Make sure you subscribe to get more of these every single week. The book that I want to talk about is Hunt for Wolverine, the Adamantium Agenda #1, written by Tom Taylor, and this is going to be dealing with a former team of Wolverines, and not the X-Men. This is when he was on the Avengers, when we've got Iron Man, Spider-Man, Luke Cage, and Jessica Jones. These guys are going to be finding Wolverine. They're going to be on the hunt for this man, but what they're going to find is something a little bit different. So let's dive in and see what I'm talking about. While Weapon Lost gave us a little bit more sophisticated style of detective storytelling, Adamantium Agenda starts off in a big blockbuster kind of way. We open up on a shield bomb unit and we see the Avengers standing there. That consists of Spider-Man, Wolverine, Luke Cage, and Jessica Jones. So this is a little bit of a callback to an Avengers team that we haven't seen in quite some time, a few years ago. And the real big thing is that this is a dead man switch style bomb. Buried in the burrows of Tribeca, we see that the bomb is going to have a blast radius that is miles, but if somebody stands there and holds onto the switch and flips it manually, it's only 200 feet, which will take out the building and the surrounding blocks. But the questions that these heroes come up with aren't what you'd expect from normal Avengers. You know, they're wondering about bodies. Jessica Jones is talking about how she can get a body in a couple minutes. This is a really odd kind of combination, which made this Avengers run really fun. Wolverine, you obviously know that he's into the wet work sometimes, and Jessica Jones has a relatively interesting past, with Luke Cage being the better side of Harlem, and Spider-Man, of course, being the moral compass. He's essentially Jiminy Cricket. He's the conscience of the group. He's a little upset about how morbid the actual thought process of trying to solve this problem is. But while they know that this is a hero-killing bomb, Peter is still ready to kind of try and make the sacrifice, act on it in his own. Maybe if he can do something, but Logan just stops him. It's just like, hey man, the radioactive spider that bit you ain't gonna make you regenerate from this kind of stuff, which leads to some fun. Tom Taylor, as far as his writing is concerned, plays a really good dynamic between all these different characters, bringing their personalities to the page. I think that he writes Wolverine actually pretty well in this situation, but he writes him a little bit more selfless. He's not necessarily selfish, and so he gets down into the core of that character. He wants to make the sacrifice because he knows that he has the least to lose out of this group. Peter Parker obviously has a family. He might not necessarily know the intimacies of those things, but he knows that Peter can't make that sacrifice. Jessica and Luke, they might be really strong. Luke might be indestructible up until the point that he's not, but Logan is the one that has repeatedly taken that sacrifice, been destroyed, rebuilt, and reborn due to his regenerative powers over time, so he is the one that is best suited for this. And as they all leave, you know, Spider-Man makes a promise to Logan to kind of piece him back together. He flips the switch, and as the bomb explodes in front of him, he seems to utter some concerns or maybe some profanities about the person that this seems to be intended for, and we see the evaporation of Logan in front of this, raising some sort of green radioactive cloud into the middle of New York City. As they're at the detonation site, we see Tony Stark finally arrive, and they start to have this talk, this confrontation, where he already knows, he seems to have an idea of exactly what's happening. But we flash forward now. Tony Stark is at the unmarked gravesite of Logan. He's talking to Kitty Pryde, saying that he needs to help him out. He made a promise a long time ago to protect his body if anything were to happen to him, and he already has a lead, but he's got to call a few folks, and that's when he starts to rally this Avengers team again. We talk to Spider-Man. Spider-Man is in the middle of fighting the Vulture, one of the nemesis that was introduced early on in his series, and he's done in about 3 panels. But this leads to Tony giving Spider-Man the lowdown. He's got some contacts in the black market that are supposed to alert him when Stark Tech makes its way onto there, but he did hear some rumblings that there are some body parts, there's some DNA, there's a person that is going up for sale, and with the recent disappearance of Logan's body, this is a bit too suspicious. So he's sending a jet for everybody, and he's regrouping the Avengers at this point in time, bringing them out to what appears to be a submarine specifically designed for having nefarious dealings inside international waters. Everybody's meant to wear a mask so that way nobody can see their faces, and they bring them inside, and it seems to be a relatively well-catered event. This is where this whole style of action blockbuster storytelling that Tom Taylor's putting on the page really kind of plays out. You're mixing in some laughs, you're mixing in some excitement. It's really, if you are a fan of Marvel movies, it's a comic book that paces itself very similar to the way that's set up. And there's a lot of humor that falls into this, and it plays onto the different personality types. Jessica Jones is a little bit more aggressive in her personality as they come to collect them for the auction, but it turns out that only one person is able to go from each party that's bidding. So that means that Tony Stark is volunteering for this kind of situation. So while there is humor, there is that tension, and you've got to remember that you've got superheroes and supervillains inside a tight, highly pressurized, enclosed space, like what Tony Stark says. But that leads him to this kind of bidding room where we see a whole host of different villains that are all masked, and I can't really make out a lot of them, but it looks like we've got a really interesting collection of characters. Then, now that everybody's seated, Tony Stark is now present, and the rest of the bidding parties have already been there, the real prize is up. There's been a lot of talk about this first thing that is going to be auctioned off. The DNA, the entire sequence, the entirety of a single person up for auction, and that is Danielle Cage, the daughter of Luke Cage and Jessica Jones. And with these parents already on board the submarine, shit is about to get real. And that's where we get the misdirection, the mislead of big blockbuster action storytelling. You know, what you think is going to happen doesn't necessarily happen inside the first act. This is the first act of a 3-part movie-style story that's going to take place over the first 4 issues of Adamantium Agenda, and I think that it's a really good structure for how this is going to play out. I really like the art style. I think that it really captures a lot of the characters very well, and Tom Taylor has a real good grasp of moving in between exposition, action, and then comedy, and throwing in those little jabs to make this a very fun and entertaining comic book. Does it have a lot of depth to it? We don't necessarily know now. We haven't seen the entirety of the story, but I do think that it's got a very high entertainment factor. So if you're into Wolverine, or you want to see these kind of characters interact as they kind of use Wolverine as a unifying kind of characteristic, a unifying thing that is going to bring them all back together, I really think that this is a really solid book for you. But it might not necessarily be for everybody. What I want to know is what you guys think, so hit me up in the comments down below and we can have that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.